Don't lose it or go to court over it. What is it? Money. Today's expert will share with us how we can best protect our assets as we go through life's transitions. Getting married, getting divorced, getting on our aging journey. That's what we want to cover today. Hi, my name is Melina Rissone. I'm a seniors real estate specialist in San Diego, associate broker with Coldwell Banker West, and real estate collaboration specialist for divorce.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Hsiao. I am a board-certified estate planning specialist. I help families protect their loved ones and assets.
Let's get right into it. So Amy, please share with us, how do you help your clients protect their assets as they go through these different transitions in life? And how does a step-by-step plan look like?
Yeah, so we work really hard in our lifetimes to build our assets.
Yes.
Unfortunately, during certain transitions in our life, we lose them. So the typical transitions that we may have in our lives are, for example, getting married, getting divorced, aging, or any type of life-changing events, having a baby, anything like that. In these moments, and also incapacity and death, these are all different transitions in life where people tend to have to spend a lot of money, either intentionally or unintentionally. Now, there are ways to protect your assets simply by planning in advance. And that is exactly what I help families do. A lot of the times when families come to me, we sit down in what's called a family wealth planning session, where we identify where they are at in their journey. For example, a young family comes to me and we would ask, okay, so how many kids do you have? How old are they? Did you just get married, or is this a blended family? Do you have assets from previous relationships? All sorts of questions like that. And then we would pinpoint what needs to be done for them.
So what will be something that you would help them do then?
It depends on the client, of course.
Yes.
So if they are a young family with minor children, we always start with what's called a kids protection plan. So we always want to make sure if something happens to us, our children are protected, they can be with their loved ones, and that there are assets to support them to finish their college or school, healthcare, and things like that. So that would be one portion.
And I'm sorry, can you say again, like what was that called? It's a family planning session?
Family wealth planning session.
Okay, got it. Okay, super. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a 2-hour session where we sit down and talk to the clients about, their family dynamics, their assets, and what they want to accomplish, what happens if, one of the families gets sick or if they have any special needs. From there, we map out the different options for them. And then, of course, the client would choose what makes the most sense to them. Or people usually come to me because they want to make sure if something happens to them, for example, in an accident or they get sick or something, their children would be properly taken care of by their loved ones.
And what is that document called that you put in place with these families during your session?
So there's no one document. It's actually comprehensive estate planning that we do for the clients. And so depending on what the client needs, we may suggest different things, such as a will, a pour-over will, a trust. A trust is like a treasure box. It's a legal document that protects your house so that nobody has to go to court in case something were to happen. Yeah,
got it.
A lot of people don't know this, but in California or in any state, when you own a home, if something happens to you, your family members have to go to court before they can even inherit the asset, before they can access your bank account.
Yes.
A lot of the times after people pass away, the banks will freeze your accounts so the children cannot even access the money to pay for food, education, and things like that.
That's correct.
And if the children want to sell mom and dad's house to be able to pay for things, they can't even do that because under the law, they don't have the authority to do that without having to go to court.
You're absolutely correct. A lot of people are actually not aware. Now, to make matters even more complicated, what if one of the parents owns a business? It's even more complicated for children to have access, or even spouses to have access to corporate accounts.
Absolutely. That's a great question.
Yeah.
So we help a lot of business owners consider that portion into their estate planning. For business owners especially, you need to consider, okay, do I want my children to run my business
Yeah.
upon my passing, they may not be the best choice.
Right.
You may want, maybe you have a partner in your business that you want to take over. But then if you want them to take over your business, then that partner needs to pay residual income to your children.
Yes.
So there are a lot of different ways you could structure it. And I, of course, in my consultations, I guide you through those conversations.
So important. And these are things that on a daily basis, we just don't think about it. We just don't. We're so in our daily operations. Now, help us understand. Let's say there's this family, they have minor children, they have this set up now, so they're properly set up. But they go down their journey and unfortunately they find that they want a divorce. Now they had proper planning, luckily, so hopefully it'd be a little bit easier to divide it. But how would you help this family now that goes down the divorce route?
The most important thing is once divorce is filed, there's this law that prohibits you from moving assets out of the community. So we have to think about pre-divorce planning, during divorce planning, or post-divorce planning. For most families, you want to be able to, if it's an amicable divorce, you can say, if you already have planning, and it also depends on the type of planning you already have. For people who clearly list out what their separate property assets are, that may be easier. But for families who have everything joined or everything community-based, then they have to start splitting up assets.
I hear you, I hear you. Now let's talk about someone that's maybe in their 40s, 50s or so, and they're thinking about their aging journey, possibly retirement, and how they can protect their home, their 401k, their savings, their assets in general. What would a consultation look like here?
Yeah, so the most important thing is when you own a home, I'll use a home as an example.
Yes.
So when you own a home, the number we need to be aware of is, let's use an example. If the house fair market value is $500,000, and if this house is owned under a person's name, when this person passes away, then his or her family members have to go to court before they can access or liquidate the house or sell the house. The legal fees for that process, that legal process, is 5% of the fair market value. So in our example of $500,000, the legal fees in and of itself to inherit that house is $25,000. Just to be able to get that house from mom and dad.
Amazing.
And to be able to go through the process and to be able to sell it. Now, that $25,000 is based on fair market value, so it doesn't matter how much mortgage, how much equity you have paid down. So as, if you're in your 40s, 50s, and you're thinking about, okay, and you have minor children, for example, you're thinking about, I want my children to continuously live in this home, or this is going to be our legacy home. Without planning, it's most likely not going to happen because the house is going to have to go through probate.
Yeah.
And children most likely are not going to have enough liquidity to continuously pay that mortgage.
Yes.
And 70% of the families lose their homes because of that.
Oh, wow.
So that's in the death situation. Now, in the incapacity situation, unfortunately for a lot, 76% of Americans have an incapacity issue. And usually
76%?
76%, yeah. And usually when they're incapacitated, usually it lasts them about 4 years on average. And so a lot of people don't think about it. A lot of people just think, oh, I'm just going to live until I pass. Actually, the few years before passing, there's going to be some issues about who's going to take care of you. And when we need somebody else to take care of us, we have to pay them.
Yes.
So where does the money come from?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, for a lot of seniors, when they don't have that liquidity, they have to sell the house or get a reverse mortgage or something with their house. And if they end up using any government benefit, that's say nursing home or assisted living facilities, then they would have to pay for them, right? And then they lose the home. So at the end of the day, there's really nothing left for any of the descendants or any of the children. even assuming the medical bills were paid.
Yeah.
And if the medical bills were not paid,
Then it's
get
debt.
this, after this person passes, the government can come after you. It's called estate recovery. So if you use any government benefits, the government can come after your descendants to collect that. Okay, so
That's scary. I did not know that.
with proper planning, you can prevent that from happening. And so a lot of the time, so in California especially, when you put a house in a trust, it'll prevent the government from doing what's called an estate recovery if you ever use any government benefits.
Wow, that is really something I did not know. So Amy, just to confirm, you shared that when a family, one in the family passes away and there's no proper document in place how the inheritance will be handled, it goes to probate court. Then the children, let's say, will have to go through the process that costs them $25,000 in the example, if the house was worth $500, let's say, to even get to that property or funds that are available and so forth. Who pays the mortgage during that time?
So the mortgage has to be paid. If the mortgage is not paid, the house will be foreclosed on.
Yeah.
So, I mean, most people have term life insurance to cover the mortgage payment. And as long as the mortgage is being paid, then you're fine. The children can continue staying on it usually, unless, but the problem for most families is they simply don't have the liquidity to pay for that mortgage. And unfortunately, they lose the home that way.
So essentially, there's someone that passes away, the children live in the home, there is a big pocket of savings in an account that no one can access without the proper planning. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly.
That is really...
And so the idea here, the legal concept here is when during your lifetime you are able to own assets or own homes because of your name and your signature, right? When we buy a home, we have to sign in escrow, to close on the house.
Yeah.
Upon passing, our own signature doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And so that's why we cannot do anything, your children cannot do anything or any legal actions on the house.
Yes.
Because the judge actually has to authorize that signature. And so that's the concept of the legal process that one has to go through when you own assets under your name.
Thank you so much for explaining. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, Amy, so you just shared with us what happens when we own a property or assets under our name. How else or in what other ways can we own assets and homes?
Typically what people do is owning the real property under what's called a revocable living trust. So when you own a home in a trust, upon incapacity or passing, you do not technically own any assets under your individual name. It's all under this treasure box called the trust. And so how does this trust work? Upon passing, whoever you name as successor trustee will step in and say, oh, you know what, I'm the trustee. I now manage mom and dad's assets so I can legally either sell the house or get a new mortgage or whatever I need to do to handle the property.
Would you say that it is available to have specific preferences and have a unique trust setup? To give you an example, I had clients in the past that were working on establishing a trust. Their children were living out of state, and they interviewed me to put my name in the trust to sell the property when the trustees later on found it appropriate. But they wanted to make it easy for their children to already go through the interview process, so whenever the time came the house needed to be sold, it was already arranged who would actually help them with that either.
Yeah.
So I thought that was like a very unique approach of organizing and pre-planning. So I guess that would also suggest that there's a lot of unique and individual items you could put in a trust?
Yes, it's a treasure box, and you design your treasure box however you want it to look like. And in fact, a lot of the times we ask people, what are your goals? Like for example, why do you want to leave money for your children? Is it to encourage them to complete college? What are some extracurricular activities you want them to participate in? if you were not here? If you have relatives overseas, do you want to give them travel expenses to visit them every year? So it gets as detailed as that.
Super, super. And very, I like how you call it the treasure box. You can really uniquely design your treasure box. So that's really sweet.
Yeah, another important thing about this treasure box is the treasure box only protects your treasures if you have treasures in it, right?
Right.
So you can create a treasure box, but then forget to put all your treasures in it.
Right.
And then when upon passing, when you open up the treasure box, it doesn't have anything in it, and all the other things are still outside. In that situation, you still end up having to go to court.
So I guess it's important to continuously review, probably once a year or every couple years, really, to see what else do I need to put in my treasure box as we're on our journey.
When you buy that new home or sell the house or whatever happens in your life, you want to make sure everything is in your treasure box.
Yeah.
So have a treasure box, make sure to fill it.
Super. That makes sense, yeah. Amy, help us understand how you help our senior population, active adults. How can you help your clients that are approaching retirement age or are preparing for it? Especially in terms of healthcare.
Healthcare, and the power of attorney. So the most important thing is to have what's called a power of attorney. That basically is an authorization for another adult to make decisions for you when you're not able to do it yourself. We get sick and we're in the hospital and things happen, and if we're ever in a coma situation, we cannot speak for ourselves. We need another adult that we authorize to be able to make that decision for us. Otherwise, we end up in court again. And when we end up in court, it's going to cost us a lot of money, and it's also very time consuming.
And stressful.
Yes, and I'll use an example. A daughter came to me wanting to make some healthcare decisions for her mom because her mom got sick in the hospital, and the daughter came to me. Unfortunately, they did not have any planning at all. So at that time, the daughter could not even make any healthcare decisions, could not talk to the doctor because they had no documents at all. So the doctor said, well, unfortunately, we have to get a court order for you to be able to make decisions for mom. That court process is, because right now with the court budget cut, to even get on the court calendar takes about 6 months.
Oh my God.
And all the while her mom is lying in bed in the hospital. The solution is really simple. All you need to do is to have that power of attorney in advance. And you need to do that when you're healthy and capable so that you can have that authority to give to another adult.
Amy, I'm curious. So we talked about the power of attorney for medical decisions on one's behalf. What else is there for medical, like a medical directive, other medical documents? Help us understand, please.
That's a good question. So when it comes to healthcare, there are 3 different parts. Healthcare power of attorney that authorizes another adult to make important medical decisions for you. There's a HIPAA authorization and that allows another person to access your medical records so that they can know what's going on in order to make those decisions. There's also an advanced healthcare directive. It's also called a living will. It says what happens in terminal situations. Do you want the plugs to be pulled, or do you want life support? So those are important decisions that it's a good idea to make those decisions in advance so your loved ones know what you want to be done to your body. Otherwise, your loved ones are left making those decisions themselves without knowing what you want. And it can be a really emotionally heavy burden for them.
Like with anything, it's just easiest to have thought about it before and to avoid crisis and with proper planning.
Yeah, and I had a recent client who had to go through this. Unfortunately, they didn't have the planning, and she was faced with having to pull the plug of her late husband at that time. They struggled for a whole month in the hospital. We ended up even talking to the hospital just because the healthcare document was not there.
What would you say, is there anything specific related to hospice care or anything else that you see? You mentioned this document is called the directive. Like we talked earlier about a trust, how it can be uniquely designed.
Yeah.
What are some items you can uniquely design in a in sort of like the latest stage of life plan?
Yeah. Well, everything is uniquely designed in my office, and we really there's a lot of nuance to the planning. And depending on the family dynamics, we touch upon different things. For people who are aging, really the money for medical care is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And when it comes to money and healthcare, there are three buckets of money, right? One is your own money, so you pretty much just burn down all the money. And so just so you know how expensive it can get when it comes to care, the average cost of nursing home in California is $10,000 a month.
Yeah.
And so if you want to just use your own money, if you have, let's say, $300,000, you would burn through all of that money in just a few years. So you can use your own money. And the second is you can, if you have long-term care insurance, that's one other option. And the third thing is through legal planning. So there's what's called a Medicaid planning or Medi-Cal in California. It's called Medi-Cal planning to pre-plan in advance so that you can preserve your assets and protect your assets so that those money doesn't have to be burned in paying for your medical bills, and you have other ways you can get government assistance to pay for your nursing home care, to pay for your assisted living care. This takes planning. It takes at least 2.5 years in advance to plan for it, depending on your situation. But you can definitely set it up.
Okay, super. So helpful to know. So Amy, let's talk about children, minor children. What can we do? We touched on it a little bit in the beginning of the interview. I want to kind of circle back. How can we best protect the interest of our children and their lives if we as a parent become incapacitated? And what would you specifically recommend for children with special needs?
Yeah, so let me just start with an example. So let's say you and your loved ones go out for a date night or whatever, and then you hire a nanny to watch your little ones at home for a few hours. Unfortunately, something happens on your way home. You get in a car accident. Now, all of a sudden, the police officer comes to your home, knock on the door, and ask you, okay, who is this nanny person? Give me the legal authority. Why are you taking care of the kid? The nanny, without any planning, is unable to produce any documents for the police. At this moment, the police has no other choice but to send the child, your child, to Child Protective Services. Okay, so that's what's going to happen to the child without any planning. Once the child goes to Child Protective Services, now let's say your mom and dad came in from another state or to see their grandchild. They're going to have to go to Child Protective Services, and CPS will tell them, well, we cannot release the child to you because we need a court order. See, because from the CPS's perspective, they don't know who you are. You can claim to be who you are, but they don't really know your relationship with the child. So in order to be safe, they want to see a court document. And so then you end up in court. When you go to court, we know it costs money and it's very time consuming. And it may take minimally 6 months or up to a year before you can even be with your grandchildren. In order to prevent that from happening, the solution is actually really simple. You just need to name guardians in place. So once you have a guardian named, you want to say, if something happened to me, I want my neighbor or I want my friend, my best friend to take care of my children. So you're giving them the legal authority so that at least in the accident example that I just gave, somebody will be immediately available in your home with legal authority so that when the police shows up, that person can present that legal authority. The police will leave the person alone, and then your children would not have to be sent to Child Protective Services.
One thing that comes up for me often also when I work with families that are blended, let's say there are two partners, they're not married, they have minor children to care for from one party. I'm really curious, how do you help them set up sort of a plan when they're not married?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's becoming more and more common nowadays, and we do a lot of planning for this type of family. And so it depends on how much assets you have. A lot of the times people have assets that they bring into a relationship from a previous relationship. So we usually recommend keeping them separate. So you have your own separate property, I have my own separate property, and then now coming together, we're creating our own joint community property. So for example, if they now coming together, they want to buy a home together, right? Then they can put their home in their community property trust.
Nice.
And so you would essentially have 3 sets of design to say, because depending also on how old your children are, if they are really young and you just met one another and you're pretty much raising your kids together, then they, a lot of the times, the joint children, or the children that are similar age can just share everything equally. But if there's a big age gap, maybe I may want certain things to go to only my side of children, and you may want things to go to your side of children, and then we may come up with something to go to our joint children if we have joint children.
Yeah. Wow, yeah, it gets complicated there.
It gets complicated.
But what I hear you say is that you can uniquely design all these different scenarios. So you can kind of keep whatever assets that you brought on, whatever assets you acquire together. And essentially the same with the kids, right?
And I really work on promoting a lot of unity and peace in these types of discussions, as I know it gets quite sensitive, and so we really consider. And it gets really complicated too with the exes, and so we need to talk about that as well.
Yes. And so, actually, that brings up a question for me. How about custody? So let's say there's a custody plan for the parents. There's a new partner that comes into the picture. Like, how do you include that partner in terms of visitation rights? Because I do see that comes up a lot for children that are, let's say, teenager. Something happens to maybe the biological one of the partners, custody automatically goes to the other, and then how can they continue visitation rights with the blended family partner, essentially?
Yeah, so when people get divorced, they get this marital settlement agreement from the court. So it just has to follow what it says there. So if it's 100% to the mom, then the mom has that right? And then the dad would have, let's say 95%, and then dad has 5% of visitation right, for example. Then that just has to be followed based on the court document. Now, the reality is, when it comes down to the practical side of things, the better you can get along and just talk to each other and figure that out outside of court, the better. Because if you have to resort to any type of legal resolution or court resolution, and then having the court monitor you, that just is not going to work really well. So one thing that's really important for blended families with minor children is if you're living with a new partner now, and let's say your child from a previous relationship gets sick, can your now partner have the legal authority to take your child to see the doctor, for example? Unless you authorize your new partner to have that legal authority, she or he does not have that legal authority, and she or he cannot speak with the hospital on behalf of your child. And so it just depends on what type of dynamic you have and what kind of authority you want to give to your now new partner. And of course, it also depends on your relationship with your ex. So it's very complicated. And I guide my clients through all these discussions in our meetings and come up and then we'll together figure out a plan that's best for you.
And would you say that is part of that initial sort of family planning session that you're setting?
Yeah, so in the family wealth planning session, it's a 2-hour meeting with me, and usually we spend the first hour just for me to get to understand your family dynamics, your assets, to really understand what your major concerns are. And then in the second hour is when we map out a plan for you.
So now let's pretend, or maybe not pretend much, but I am not from here. I'm from Germany. Let's pretend my family, aunts, uncles, mom, dad, wanted to buy a property for my children, for my daughter. how would that look like, and how could they go ahead and do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So for foreign nationals who want to buy real estate in the United States, one thing you have to know is the estate tax exemption amount for foreign nationals owning real estate here is only $60,000. What that means in plain English is if I'm a foreign national and I own a house here, and if something happens to me, if I pass, then anything above $60,000, 40% of that has to go to the IRS. So in other words, if I pass, that house is not going to be there for my grandchildren.
Unless, what can we do?
With proper planning.
How can
with
we do
proper
that?
planning, so we typically recommend proper insurance and trust plan to go hand in hand to make sure that in case of passing, there's enough liquidity to pay for those taxes if they need to be paid, and
Especially
that nobody has to go to court to have access to the house.
So today we talked about the different life transitions that we go through and how we can best protect our money and our assets in life. We talked about real estate law, estate planning law, and all these different scenarios and examples with our expert, Amy. Definitely check out the show notes below, subscribe to our channel, hit the little button there with the bell so that you get notified for all the next episodes that we shoot. My name is Melina Rissone, and we'll see you soon.